Today we are doing Unit 2, Lesson 7, and the topic is SAS, SSS, and I hope you have an idea of what that might mean, but we'll learn all about it in just a moment. So go ahead and get that down, and then when you're ready, turn to a new page. And yikes, here we go. So pause if you need to. Unit 2, Lesson 7, the essential question is, what do SAS and SSS tell us about triangles? And you've got a lot to get down here, so go ahead and pause and come back when you're ready. So we learned in, I guess, 2 lessons ago that we can prove that 2 triangles are congruent by using CPCTC, and that stands for corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. And so that's just a shortcut for saying all corresponding angles and sides are congruent. So that's 6 matches that we have to make, right? Because we have to match up all 3 angles and show that they're congruent, and match up all 3 sides and show that they're congruent. And so that might look something like this. Let's draw some triangles. And I'm on purpose making them sort of rotated from one another. And let's mark them up. A, B, C. And we're going to go J, M, L. And we're going to show that we have some information about corresponding parts. So first we're going to talk about the angles. So we're going to say that angle and that angle are congruent, and this angle and this angle are congruent, and then C and M are congruent. So that's a good start because we've got 3 corresponding angles, and now we're going to show that we also have 3 corresponding sides. So we're going to say 1 tick mark there, 1 tick mark, 2 tick marks, 2 tick marks, 3 and 3. And so what I'd like you to try to do right now on your own is write the congruent statement, and that's not as easy as it might seem, right? Because you've got to make sure you're using the corresponding angles in the correct order. So the congruent statement will look something like this. Triangle ABC is congruent to triangle, and you go ahead and finish that up for me. So I hope you got J, L, M. That's the only option because A corresponds with J, B corresponds with L, and C corresponds with M. So this is one way we can show we've got 2 congruent triangles here. All the corresponding angles are congruent, all the corresponding sides are congruent. And then in our last lesson, we learned about ASA. And just to recap, ASA means that we have 2 congruent angle pairs, 2 congruent angle pairs, and the sides between them are congruent. Okay, so take a minute to get that down. This is redundant here, I didn't need to put the symbol, but 2 congruent angle pairs, and the sides between them are also congruent. So let's draw another example of what that might look like. So give yourself 2 triangles like that, and we're going to go A, B, C, H, L, J. And then we've got angle A congruent with angle H, angle C congruent with angle L, And then to mark the congruent sides, if I'm going to be using ASA, I need to make sure that the congruent side pair is between the congruent angles. So it would have to be that side and that side. If it was different sides, then we wouldn't be able to use ASA here. So ASA means two angles and their included side. And so let's go ahead and write this congruent statement as well. Triangle ABC is congruent to triangle, and you fill it out for me. So hopefully you wrote H, J, L. A corresponds with H, B corresponds with J, it's the unmarked angle, and C corresponds with L. So this is a nice little shortcut because it means we don't need 6 corresponding parts, we really only need 3 corresponding parts, 2 angles, 1 side. And today we're going to talk about 2 other shortcuts that are really, really useful. The first one is so similar to this, but it's SAS. And I hope you can take a good guess as to what that might mean. In this case, we have 2 sides and the angle in between. So here we have 2 congruent side pairs. That means their side lengths are the same. And the angles between them are congruent. So it's so similar to this one, it's just that in this case we have 2 congruent sides with the angle between. Here we had 2 congruent angles with the side in between. So this is a new shortcut, and let me kind of show you what it's going to look like. Again, we're going to draw sort of 2 triangles and just make them be a little rotated just to make it a little tricky. Boy, those are not congruent, but we're going to mark them congruent anyway. So we're going to go A, B, C, N, Q, P. And so I'm going to mark this up so that they're congruent by side angle side, and that means I need 2 congruent side pairs. So let's start there and mark some congruent side pairs. So let's say that AB is congruent to NQ, and let's say that AC is congruent to PQ. Now, for side angle side to be the shortcut that I can use to show that these 2 triangles are congruent, I need to make sure that the angle that I mark congruent is between the 2 sides. So in other words, these 2 sides meet right here at angle A. So I'm going to show that that angle is congruent to the angle between those 2 sides over here. These 2 sides meet at point Q. So this is side angle side because the angle that we're comparing is between the 2 sides that we're comparing. So these 2 triangles are congruent. We don't need any other information. We've got 2 congruent sides and the angle between them. It turns out that's enough to know that the triangles are congruent. So let's write the statement. So triangle ABC, you go ahead and fill it out and then check in to see if you did it right. The first letter is easy. A and Q are marked congruent. The next 2 are more challenging because they don't have markings. So angle B, the way that I would look at it is that it's the angle that's across from the 2 tick mark side. It's across from it. So I need to do the same thing over here. Here's the 2 tick mark side. The angle across from it is angle N, and so that would need to come next. And then just to double check, C is another way you can think about it is C is across from the 1 mark. So it's going to be P. You can also think about C being between the 2 marks and the no marks, and P is between the 2 marks and the no marks. So you can look at it a couple different ways, but you've got to make sure you're lining up your corresponding parts. So there we go. Now we have a third shortcut. So we no longer need 6 pairs of corresponding parts. We can do 3 pairs, angle side angle or side angle side. And then there's one more shortcut, and this is actually the easiest one that exists, SSS, and that stands for side, side, side. And this is super easy because it simply means that if let's write it that way, if all corresponding sides are congruent, then the triangles are congruent. And it's very easy to spot when you have side, side, side. I will show you. Let's draw some triangles. These are going to have to be smaller because I'm out of space. A, B, C, and we'll go with J, P, M. And I'm going to say we've got 1 tick mark, 1 tick mark, 2 tick marks, 2 tick marks, 3, and 3. The only way to make 2 triangles where all the sides are congruent like this is if their angles are also congruent. It's going to fix the angles in place. So these 2 triangles are congruent. We don't even need to know anything about the angles. So let's write our congruent statement. You go ahead and fill it out and then check in with me to see if you were right. So this is the hard part, really. Knowing they're congruent is simple, side, side, side. But we do need to make sure we line everything up. So A is between the 1 and 2. And so here's my 1 and 2. J is where they meet. So J corresponds with A. B is between the 1 and the 3. So if I look at the 1 and the 3 here, that's where M meets. And then C is between the 2 and the 3, and P is between the 2 and the 3. So that's the congruent statement. So if I had my act together in class, I had you glue in some examples before you watched this video. If I didn't have my act together, then hopefully I at least gave this to you so that you can get it glued in. And we're just going to run through these examples pretty quickly. The way that I'm going to do this is I think I'll do 2 with you, and then I'm going to ask you to pause the video and do the rest on your own, and then you can check back in and look for the answers. So what we're trying to do here in these examples is determine if the triangles are congruent. If they are, I want to know 2 things. I want to know what's the shortcut you used, and I also want to know what is the congruence statement. So those are the 2 things that we're going to do. So for example 1, I can see that I have 2 sides and the included angle, the angle between them. So I'm going to kind of wonder, I'm just going to mark this now, am I going to be able to use side, angle, side to show that these triangles are congruent? So I've got 2 sides and an included angle, and if I have congruent corresponding parts over here, it's going to work. So I've got here 2 sides and an included angle. I also have a 3rd side, but since I don't have a 3rd side over here, side, side, side won't work, right? You might think side, 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 but it turns out no, because I don't have that here. I do have 2 sides and an included angle, but I hope you can see that we have sort of an issue here. We do have 2 sides and an included angle, but this angle is 43 degrees, and this angle is 45 degrees, and those are not congruent. And so I cannot use side, angle, side. What I know is that these triangles are not congruent. Okay, and that's because none of the shortcuts worked. Even though I had 2 sides and an included angle, those included angles weren't the same, so they're not congruent. Let's look at example 2. I have lots of information here. I have side, side, side. I have 3 sides. I also have side, angle, side. So I'm going to put question marks because this isn't settled. I have side, angle, side because I have this marked angle. And even though it doesn't tell me how many degrees, I might see a similarly marked angle over here. So these are kind of the options. So when I look over here for side, 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 I don't have a 3rd side. So side, side, side won't work. Maybe side, angle, side will. And sure enough, I have 2 sides and an included angle. And these are marked congruent. So I've got 2.5, 2.5, 1.7, 1.7. So I have 2 pairs of congruent sides, and the angle between them is congruent. So these triangles are congruent. And so we're going to say congruent by side, angle, side. So if they are congruent, you're going to have to tell me what shortcut you used. And then we need to do one more thing, which is write our triangle congruent statement. So the way you do that is you start with your first triangle and you write it in any order. I'll say D, E, F is congruent to triangle, and then you just need to make sure you match them up. So D is marked with one loop, and so is G. E, the way I'm going to figure this out is E is between the 2.5 and 2.9. So I'm going to look over here, 2.5, this one must be 2.9, right? Because it's not marked with anything. And so E corresponds with H. F is between 1.7 and 2.9, and J is between 1.7 and 2.9. So that would be J. Okay? So what I'd like for you to do is do the same thing on these other 4 examples. Identify, are they congruent or not? If they are congruent, I want to know what's the shortcut, and I want you to write the congruent statement. So go ahead and pause the video now, finish up those examples, and then come back in a minute to check and see if you got them right. Okay, we're back to check your answers. So example 3 was congruent by side, angle, side. We've got 2 sides and the included angle. And this is my congruent statement. Now you might have them in a different order. The important thing is that J is in the same spot as M, K is in the same spot as N, and L is in the same spot as P. But it's okay if you wrote like LKJ, PNM. It doesn't matter as long as the corresponding parts match up. Example 4 is cool because there are actually 2 different shortcuts you can use. We do have side, 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 12, 20, 24, 12, 20, 24. So we have side, side, side. We also have side, angle, side because these 2 angles are congruent. And I hope you can see that they're congruent because they're vertical angles. We don't need it to be marked because we know that vertical angles are always congruent. And so you could also use side, angle, side. Side, angle, side is another option. And then this would be the congruent statement, DEH and FGH. And again, it's okay if they're in a different order as long as D matches with F, E matches with G, and H matches with itself. H is that point, and so it's a vertex of both triangles. 5 and 6, these are congruent by side, side, side. There's the congruent statement, and then example 6, those triangles are not congruent. You might initially think side, 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 but hopefully you caught that these 2 sides, these 2 sides do match. It's these 2 sides that don't match, okay, the 28 and the 32.